he had watched Patton develop over decades. From the brash cavalry officer who rode into Mexico with Pershing, hunting Pancho Villa, to the tank commander who understood mechanized warfare before anyone else in the American Army. Patton had spent his entire career preparing for exactly the kind of war that was now being fought. While other officers studied theory, Patton had lived it. The Sicily campaign proved everything Marshall believed about him. While British forces under Montgomery ground forward slowly against German defenses, Patton's 7th Army had exploded across the island like a lightning bolt. He captured Palermo in a thrust so fast the Germans never saw it coming. Then he pivoted and raced Montgomery to Messina, beating the British hero to the city and humiliating him in the process. 90,000 men moving at speeds that military theorists said were impossible in modern warfare. But more importantly, the Germans noticed. Intelligence reports landed on Marshall's desk weekly. Intercepted communications. Interrogation transcripts, all saying the same thing. German commanders feared Patton above all other Allied generals. They planned defensive positions, assuming Patton would attack. They positioned their best units where they thought Patton would strike. That psychological advantage was worth entire divisions. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt had said it explicitly in a captured communication. Patton is their best. Where he goes, we must concentrate everything. And now Patton had thrown it all away, not in combat, not through military failure, but through 2 minutes of rage in 2 hospital tents. Marshall read the reports again. August 3rd, 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia. Patton encountered Private Cole sitting on a stool, apparently unwounded. When Cole explained he couldn't take the shelling anymore, Patton erupted. He slapped the soldier across the face with his gloves. Then he grabbed him by the collar and physically threw him out of the tent. "I won't have these cowards here," Patton had shouted. "Send him back to the front." 7 days later, 93rd Evacuation Hospital. Private Paul Bennett, trembling and weeping. Patton walked up to him and demanded to know what was wrong. "It's my nerves," Bennett said. "I can't stand the shelling anymore." Patton went white with rage. He slapped Bennett twice across the face. Then he pulled his ivory-handled pistol from its holster. "You're going back to the front lines," Patton screamed. "You ought to be lined up against a wall and shot. In fact, I ought to shoot you myself right now, you goddamned coward." Medical staff had to physically restrain Patton and remove him from the hospital. Marshall understood Patton's mindset, even if he couldn't excuse it. Patton genuinely didn't believe in combat fatigue as a medical condition. To him, it was weakness. Cowardice that infected other soldiers and destroyed unit cohesion. Patton's own experience in World War I, where he had been wounded and immediately returned to action, had convinced him that willpower separated warriors from cowards. He was wrong, catastrophically, inexcusably wrong. But Marshall knew why Patton thought that way. Eisenhower had learned of the incidents from medical officers who filed formal complaints. His letter to Patton on August 17th was scathing. "I am well aware of your feeling that a tough driving commander is necessary for a successful army, but this does not excuse violence or abuse of the sick. I question your judgment, your self-discipline, and your fitness to command." But critically, Eisenhower didn't relieve him. Instead, he ordered Patton to apologize, personally, to both soldiers. To the medical staffs who witnessed the incidents, and to every single division under his command, it was calculated humiliation. Punishment designed to satisfy military justice while keeping Patton available for future operations. Patton complied. He stood before thousands of soldiers and admitted he had been wrong. It violated everything in his nature. But he understood the alternative was the end of his career. What he didn't know was that the press corps already knew everything. Eisenhower had personally asked them to sit on the story, or now, that silence lasted exactly 99 days. November 21st, 1943. Drew Pearson's radio broadcast reached 12 million Americans. His voice dripped with righteous anger as he revealed the incidents. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, commander of the 7th Army, has struck a shell-shocked soldier in a hospital. This is brutality by a high-ranking officer against a defenseless enlisted man. The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. The Washington Post called it despicable. The New York Times questioned Patton's fitness to lead American soldiers. Editorial pages across the country exploded with condemnation. Congressman after congressman rose to denounce him. Representative Jed Johnson of Oklahoma labeled it disgraceful. Representative Charles Hoven of Iowa, himself a combat veteran, declared that tyrants like Patton had no place in the American Army. Even John J. Pershing, Patton's own mentor from World War I, publicly condemned him. Secretary of War Henry Stimson found himself under siege. The Senate demanded explanations. Why wasn't Patton court-martialed? Why was he still wearing a uniform? Committee hearings were scheduled. Political careers were threatened. The carefully cultivated relationship between the War Department and Congress was being shredded by one general's inability to control his temper. And in his Pentagon office, Marshall was reading something else entirely. German intelligence reports. Through ultra-intercepts and prisoner interrogations, Allied intelligence had confirmed something remarkable. The Germans believed Patton's disgrace was genuine. They thought the slapping incidents had ended his combat career. Some Wehrmacht commanders were actually relieved. They assumed they would no longer face America's most dangerous general. That gave Marshall an idea. But first, he had to save Patton from the politicians. Marshall met with Stimson and Assistant Secretary of War John McCloy. Together, they crafted a response that would reframe the entire controversy. Stimson's letter to the Senate was blunt. General Patton must be retained because of the need for his aggressive, winning leadership in the bitter battles yet to come before final victory. It was a direct appeal to military necessity over political convenience. The letter continued with an assessment Marshall had personally reviewed. Patton is the only available Army commander with actual experience fighting field marshal, Rommel, and conducting extensive amphibious landing operations followed by rapid campaigns of exploitation. This wasn't hyperbole. Every other senior American commander lacked either the combat experience against first-rate German forces or the demonstrated ability to conduct mobile warfare that would be essential in France. Courtney Hodges was methodical but slow. Jacob Devers was untested. Omar Bradley was competent but lacked Patton's instinct for breakthrough operations. Marshall also sent a private message to Eisenhower. His words were carefully chosen. "I have been considering this matter on a purely business basis. The effect on your command, on troop confidence, and on public faith must be opposed to one unmistakable fact. Patton is the only available commander for certain assignments who possesses the necessary combat experience and tactical brilliance." The phrase purely business basis was quintessentially Marshall. He wasn't defending Patton out of friendship. He was making a calculation about winning the war. Sentiment was irrelevant. But Marshall also sent a clear warning through back channels. This was Patton's last chance. One more incident, one more public embarrassment, and not even Marshall could save him. The political crisis created an unexpected strategic opportunity. Eisenhower was planning Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion of France scheduled for June 1944. Success depended partly on convincing the Germans that the main attack would come at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy, for the deception to work. The Allies needed the Germans to believe a massive army group was assembling in southeastern England, poised to strike across the narrowest part of the Channel. The Phantom Force was designated 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, and it needed a commander the Germans would find credible, someone with a reputation for aggressive action, someone they would expect to lead the main invasion. Despite his apparent disgrace, Patton was the obvious choice. The Germans knew his name. They feared his abilities. If intelligence indicated Patton was commanding FUSAG, German planners would assume that was where the real invasion would strike. The slapping incidents, which had nearly destroyed Patton's career, actually enhanced the deception. German intelligence had learned about them through press coverage and communications that were deliberately allowed to leak. They interpreted Patton's assignment to FUSAG as a face-saving gesture, a way to keep him in uniform without giving him actual combat command. This made the deception more believable. Throughout early 1944, Patton played his role in history's greatest con game. He made highly visible inspection trips throughout England, reviewing the phantom FUSAG units that existed only as inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and simulated radio traffic. German reconnaissance aircraft photographed the fake installations. German signals intelligence intercepted false communications. And German high command concluded the main invasion force was exactly where Allied planners wanted them to believe it was. The deception held even after D-Day. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6th, German commanders hesitated to commit strategic reserves. They believed Normandy was a feint. They kept the 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for Patton's assault that would never come. This gave Allied forces critical time to establish beachheads. Marshall's calculation was working perfectly. Patton's mere presence, even commanding phantom forces, was shaping German strategy. But Patton was desperate for real combat. 7 weeks after D-Day, with Allied forces grinding through Norman hedgerows at enormous cost, Marshall and Eisenhower finally unleashed him August 1, 1944. Patton's Third Army became operational in France. The impact was seismic. While other American and British forces struggled to advance miles at enormous cost, Patton's forces exploded through German lines and raced across France. Within weeks, Third Army covered over 400 miles. His forces moved so fast that traditional command and control broke down. Staff officers flew ahead in light aircraft to deliver orders personally because radio communications couldn't keep pace. German units that had held stubbornly against other Allied commanders simply melted away before Patton's onslaught. He captured more territory and destroyed more German formations in 6 weeks than other Allied forces had accomplished in 6 months. The Seine, the Marne, the Meuse, ancient rivers that had defined European warfare for centuries. Patton crossed them all in a blur of speed and violence. Marshall watched this performance with quiet satisfaction. His calculation had been correct. Retaining Patton despite the political storm, protecting him through congressional investigations, positioning him where his talents could be fully employed had all been vindicated. Third Army's rampage across France proved everything Marshall had argued about Patton's indispensability, but then Patton nearly destroyed himself again. April 1945, Cootsford, England. Before Third Army's activation, Patton spoke at the opening of a welcome club for American soldiers. He stated it was the evident destiny of the British and Americans to rule the post-war world. The comment, reported in newspapers, ignited an immediate diplomatic crisis. The Soviet Union was bearing the brunt of fighting against Germany, suffering millions of casualties. Patton's words seemed to exclude them from post-war leadership. Direct insult to America's most important ally. Eisenhower was furious. He sent a message to Marshall that revealed his frustration. Patton is unable to use reasonably good sense in matters where senior commanders must appreciate the effect of their own actions upon public opinion. This raises doubts about the wisdom of retaining him in high command. Marshall's response was identical to his earlier message. I have been considering this on a purely business basis. Then the calculation. The effect on your command must be opposed to the unmistakable fact that Patton is the only available Army commander for his present assignment who has actual experience fighting Rommel and conducting rapid campaigns of exploitation. Eisenhower kept Patton in command, but sent him a final warning. One more incident would result in immediate relief. No exceptions. Then came the moment that justified everything. December 19, 1944, Verdun, France. Emergency conference. 3 days earlier, German forces had smashed through American positions in the Ardennes forest, launching Hitler's last major offensive in the West. The surprise attack created a dangerous bulge in Allied lines. At the Belgian crossroads of Bastogne, the surrounded 101st Airborne Division was running out of ammunition and medical supplies. If Bastogne fell, the German breakthrough could reach the Meuse River and potentially drive to Antwerp, cutting off entire Allied armies. Eisenhower tried to maintain optimism. He asked for cheerful faces as commanders discussed how to respond. Patton offered characteristic bluntness. Hell, let's have the guts to let the bastards go all the way to Paris. Then we'll really cut them off and chew them up. Then he made a promise that stunned everyone present. I can attack north and relieve Bastogne within 48 hours. The other commanders thought it impossible. Patton's Third Army was heavily engaged along the Saar River, over 100 miles south of Bastogne. Turning an entire army 90 degrees and attacking in the opposite direction would require disengaging from current operations, moving hundreds of thousands of men through winter conditions, and coordinating attacks across a completely different sector. Military theorists said such a maneuver required weeks. Patton promised 2 days. He had been preparing since early November. Reading intelligence reports, he suspected a German offensive was coming. He ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans. When the crisis broke, he was ready. Leaving Verdun, Patton phoned his headquarters. 2 words: play ball. The code phrase initiated pre-arranged orders that set Third Army in motion. What followed was one of the most remarkable military movements in American history. Patton disengaged 6 full divisions from combat, pivoted them 90 degrees, and sent them racing north through snow and ice toward Bastogne. Within days, more than 133,000 vehicles were rerouted, covering an average of 50 miles per vehicle. Support echelons carried 62,000 tons of supplies. December 26th, lead elements of 4th Armored Division broke through German lines and reached Bastogne. The siege was over. In Washington, Marshall read the reports with quiet vindication. Every decision he had made regarding Patton, every political battle fought to keep him in command, was validated by the relief of Bastogne. The maneuver demonstrated everything Marshall had argued. No other American commander could have executed that operation with the same speed and coordination. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding German forces in the Bulge, reportedly threw down his baton when he learned Patton had reached Bastogne. "That man," he said, "is always where we don't expect him." Marshall understood what critics never grasped. Modern warfare required different skill sets. Bradley was methodical. Montgomery was careful. But Patton possessed something neither had: an instinctive grasp of mobile warfare that allowed him to seize opportunities others couldn't perceive. It wasn't just aggression. It was understanding how armored formations moved, how logistics functioned under pressure, how to maintain momentum when conventional wisdom demanded consolidation. The relief of Bastogne justified everything Marshall said about needing aggressive, winning leadership in the bitter battles before final victory. Patton proved indispensable. But Marshall also knew that war magnified both strengths and weaknesses. Patton's brilliance in combat was matched by catastrophic lack of judgment in everything else. Managing that contradiction required Marshall to override political pressure, defend controversial decisions, and maintain focus on what he called purely business basis calculations. On that August morning in 1943, when Marshall sat in his Pentagon office reading about 2 soldiers struck in 2 hospitals, he made a choice, not based on friendship, not based on loyalty, based on cold calculation about winning the war and saving American lives. If this deep dive into Marshall's impossible choice and Patton's redemption fascinated you, then you need to subscribe to this channel immediately. We bring you the untold stories from history's greatest conflicts, the moments where individual decisions shaped the fate of nations. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next video. Because these aren't just stories, these are the calculations that won the war.